A very intriguing receiver is set to hit free agency next week after he didn't get franchise tagged, and the Chiefs have the opportunity to bring in a weapon to put alongside Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce. And in this video, I'll share my reasons why I very well think that could happen and look at other receivers that could end up in KC as well. Then we got to talk about Russell Wilson being released, but the Broncos still being screwed, Sneed having a ton of potential trade interest, and more. But first, how about those? First up, the Denver Broncos recently announced they are releasing quarterback Russell Wilson after the league year begins March 13th. The timing of this release means the team can avoid paying a $37 million guarantee in 2025, but have no fear, because the Broncos still owe him a truck ton of money. This is no real surprise, Russell being released, but it's still insane to think about considering this is the guy they traded for just 2 years ago and gave up Drew Lock, Noah Fant, Shelby Harris, 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and a 5th-round pick to get him. The trade in and of itself wasn't horrible, I guess, all things considered. It was close to bad in hindsight, but what really made this one of the worst trades in NFL history was the fact that the Broncos then chose to extend Russell Wilson through the 2028 season before he ever even played a snap for the team. This was a 5-year, $245 million extension that included $165 million in new money, and the craziest part of all this is he was released by the team before he ever played a single down on it. In his 2 seasons with the team, Russell won them just 11 games out of 30 played, and while he did play better in 2023 once Sean Payton was brought in, even Payton himself knew he couldn't save Russ, which is why they decided to eventually bench him and part ways with him this offseason, even though the Broncos are still on the hook for $85 million. Of course, the Broncos then put out some bland statement thanking him for his time and wishing him the best in his next chapter, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, Russell Wilson shared a public statement of his own thanking Broncos country, the cafeteria staff, and basically anyone and everyone aside from Sean Payton and GM George Payton, because why the heck would Russell thank them based on how he got treated in the end? Truthfully, though, he should have thanked them for the $85 million he's still going to be getting, but alas, Russell Wilson will soon be a free agent and is expected to sign somewhere on a cheap deal, with teams like the Vikings, Steelers, and Falcons being potential landing spots, but some are saying the Raiders could even be a favorite for him to play for in 2024. And I won't lie, guys, it would be hilarious if Russell Wilson stayed within the AFC West. In fact, I am all for it. Sign that man up and let's ride.
Broncos country. Let's ride.
All right, there's reportedly a bunch of teams interested right now in trading for cornerback L'Jarius Sneed. Per Dragon Tyler of USA Today, quote, a person with direct knowledge of the situation said that the Vikings, Colts, Titans, Patriots, Lions, Falcons, and Jags have all expressed interest in the Chiefs' corner. He then noted that while the trade could very well end up happening, with many expecting the trade to take place before the draft, both sides have until mid-July to finalize a long-term extension or even as late as the NFL trade deadline to part ways via a trade. But good God, hopefully it doesn't take that long. If it does, though, maybe that means both sides are close on a long-term deal, meaning if negotiations go until July. Highly doubt it happens, but another thing that's worth bringing up is the Chiefs could also opt to just keep him on the franchise tag and let him play for one more year in Kansas City. I think those options are much less likely, though, especially considering how much attention Sneed is getting right now. The Colts have reportedly been eyeing him for quite some time, as I'm sure several other teams mentioned previously have as well. Therefore, my thoughts are in line with that of Albert Breer of Sports Illustrated, who said today that in a perfect world, L'Jarius Sneed would stay with the Chiefs. But the world is not perfect. Mahomes has a big cap hit. The team is doing all they can to bring back Chris Jones, which is going to cost a lot. There's other key players to worry about, such as Creed Humphrey, Nick Bolton, and Trey Smith, who are all up for extensions. And it's more than likely Sneed finds himself elsewhere this season after he's traded in exchange for hopefully a top 50 pick. From here, I want to take a look at the Chiefs' current wide receiver room, then turn and take a look at free agency to see some of the receivers who could most likely be pursued by KC in free agency, including one that would be absolutely nasty if the Chiefs could land him, though the NFL will probably do their best to not let it happen, and they would be wise to do so. Right now, the Chiefs wide receiver room looks as follows. You got Rashee Rice, Sky Moore, and Justin Watson. At least those are the only 3 I think are most likely returning and make the 53-man roster as things stand right now. Rice is a 100% lock. Justin Watson, you could easily move on from him. His dead cap is like nothing. But with him still being under contract this year, I think he's a reliable enough wide receiver 4 on the team and has proven as much. So he's probably staying. Then Sky Moore isn't what I would call completely safe, but I think he's loved in KC by players and coaches, and he's working hard to improve. So year 3, that's the do or die year for him, in my opinion. If he doesn't step up this year, you got to figure out a way to move on from this guy. Tony, he's still under contract, but his status remains up in the air to me with how last season ended for him. He was literally a healthy scratch in the Super Bowl and basically lived on the injury report prior to that, not playing in the last 7 or 8 games of the season. Then near the end of it, he had his whole Instagram rant. We know about all that. He's working through some things behind the scenes. No idea what's going on. But if the Chiefs want to move on from him, they would either need to trade this man, like get whatever you humanly possibly could, even if it's a 2028 7th round pick. I'm sort of being dramatic here. Or just straight up release the guy. If the Chiefs opt to release Tony, though, they would have to eat all $2.5 million of his salary because it is all dead cap. Time will certainly tell with Tony, though I certainly wouldn't be surprised if he was gone. Then they do have other receivers under contract, such as Shi Smith, Anthony Miller, Montrell Washington, Nico Remigio, and Justin Ross, but none of these guys at the moment are anywhere close to guaranteed roster locks. Ross might be the closest out of all these guys, but his mid-season suspension really threw a wrench in his progress, and who knows what the Chiefs are thinking about with him at the moment. As far as pending free agents go, Mecole Hardman and Richie James were both on 1-year deals, and I'm not sure either one of them will be back, though I could make an argument for Mecole Hardman on a cheap deal, especially if Tony is gone. And finally, we all know the Chiefs released MVS to save around $12 million in cap space. I'm thankful for his contributions, especially in the playoffs. He showed up like Frank Clark, we all know. But we also knew that MVS was getting cut because the amount you were paying this man was not worth the regular season production. So that's the look at the Chiefs' current wide receiver room, which now begs the question, who could the Chiefs bring in from the list of free agents? I'm not looking at potential cap cut casualties right now like Tyler Lockett, Mike Williams, or Deontay Johnson. I'm also not looking at receivers they could potentially trade for that's still on their rookie deals. I'm just straight up looking at available free agents. With the franchise tag deadline over, both wide receiver T. Higgins and Michael Pittman Jr., both are dogs, got hit with a tag, which is sad. And before that, Mike Evans re-signed with the Bucs on a 2-year, $52 million deal. So with those guys off of the free agency board, that leaves one pretty notable guy out there that will gather a lot of attention because the Jaguars opted to franchise tag outside linebacker Josh Allen rather than Calvin Ridley, and that means the 29-year-old receiver will be free to sign with another team. Well, the Chiefs definitely need at least one solid veteran receiver in free agency as well as another via the draft, and I want to share some reasons why Kansas City could indeed land Calvin Ridley and why the NFL would be wise to do all they can to not let that happen. First off, everywhere you look, the Chiefs are on the list of potential landing spots for Ridley. Clutch Points, CBS Sports, PFF, Arrowhead Addict, Pro Football Network, and the list goes on. And the reason for this is because Ridley is coming off one of his best years after missing 2022 due to suspension. With the Jags upon his return, though, he caught 76 passes for just over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns. And when you look at the fact that he had this level of production while getting paid just about the same as MVS, that is an eyebrow raiser. Ridley could be used to stretch the field like MVS, only running a 40 time roughly half a second slower than him. So he's a field stretcher, is explosive in his cuts, a precise route runner, he can get separation, has late hands, plus the ability to beat both man and zone coverages. Ridley could also be used on the outside to complement Rashee Rice, though the Chiefs may expand Rice's usage and roles next season. Either way, though, I think Ridley is versatile enough that he could also be moved around. Another positive for Ridley to sign with KC is that he's still yet to win a Super Bowl, and that could entice him to settle for a bit less money in free agency to go and chase a ring and help the Chiefs win a third one in a row. The problem there is, to most people these days, rings don't mean as much as money, which is fine. Football's a brutal sport. You could get injured at any time. We all know it, but it's still something to consider. With all that being said, though, there's a couple obstacles for Ridley landing on the Chiefs. He is turning 30 in December, which is a bit up there in age for Brett Veach to want to sign someone to a big contract. Ridley will also be one of the top free agent receivers on the market and may get offered well over what the Chiefs are willing to pay. But I'm going to deviate from the script to say the Chiefs are going to have to spend money at some point in time. The wide receiver room was a mess last season, and you released MVS to save $12 million, so you got to spend some of it on this room at some point. Now, as far as money goes, some are thinking that Ridley could get a 3 to 4 year deal averaging roughly $15 to $17.5 million a year. The Chiefs would probably be more comfortable with the 2-year deal, but the 3rd year could be a dummy year, and his averages could be around the 15-ish million mark. After all, before being released, MVS was slated to make over $14 million for KC this year, so it's not that far off from that. I would personally love to see Ridley be in Kansas City, as it would be a dangerous thing to pair him with Kelce and Rice. But I also understand some desperate team may offer him upwards of $20 million a year. Albert Breer said that today in his Q&A, which is a lot of money for a guy who's about to turn 30. And if Ridley wants one last huge payday, he's probably going to take it. And honestly, I wouldn't even blame him. However, there are other free agents out there that could not only fit well in KC's system, but would be both cheaper and younger. They may not be as big of a threat as Ridley, who I would consider a very solid wide receiver 2, or maybe even a receiver 1B to Rice being 1A, but for the production these other receivers could potentially get compared to the price of Ridley, the Chiefs may end up settling for less. Many have pointed to Bears wide receiver Darnell Mooney. He's only 26 years old, can play both in the slot and outside, and then obviously is familiar with KC's style of offense, as Matt Nagy used to be his head coach. In fact, his best 2-year stretch was under Matt Nagy. He's a smaller bodied guy, 5'11", 173 pounds, but runs a quick 4.38 40. And after back-to-back down years with the Bears, he could find himself in KC on a much cheaper deal than Ridley, possibly even half the price per year. He's not as dangerous as Ridley, in my opinion, but if you can get Mooney and pair him up with another free agent for roughly the same price as Ridley, that may be more tempting in the eyes of the Chiefs, who still have Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce as their main offensive weapons. I also like the idea of Cardinals wide receiver Marquise Brown. He's 5'9", 180 pounds, ran a speedy 4.27 yard 40, and is only 26 years old. Several have linked him to KC as a great potential landing spot, saying he could be a more capable deep threat than MVS ever was. He could complement Rashee Rice as well in the middle of the field, as well as take the top off of opposing defenses. Brown is coming off a down year with the Cardinals as well, so his stock is a bit lower, with PFF projecting him to sign a 1-year $12 million deal, and SpotTrack having his value closer to $15 million. That's getting up there in price, but the Chiefs love their speedy little receivers, so we could very well see Marquise Brown in red and yellow when all is said and done, depending on how it all plays out. Commanders wide receiver Curtis Samuel is another possibility. The 27-year-old only had 4 drops last year on like 85 catchable targets per PFF, and he could also be used as a ball carrier. Didn't do it as much last year, but he did have 7 carries for 39 yards, averaging 5.6 yards a carry. He's 5'11", close to 200 pounds, and ran a very quick 4.31 40 in the 2017 NFL Draft. He also has very nice hands, and while you could get him for much cheaper, he's probably more of a wide receiver 3. Some are saying another nice addition could be Saints receiver Rashid Shaheed, who had a pretty solid 2023 season. He caught 75 passes for 719 yards and 5 scores, and was also the team's punt returner. So that's why people are saying, go get that guy. He's cheap, could plug and play in Kansas City's offense, and return punts. However, it looks like he's an exclusive rights free agent, and the more I look around, the more it looks like the Saints are going to be tendering him and keeping him around for the 2024 season. Another intriguing option would be Bills receiver Gabe Davis, who we here in Chiefs Kingdom know very well from the 2021 divisional 13-second game against Buffalo at Arrowhead. That man had 8 catches for 201 yards and 4 touchdowns, which was insane. But to be fair, Honey Badger got concussed, and KC's secondary was struggling mightily to keep up in that game. Some positives here about Gabe Davis is he's had back-to-back seasons with 7 receiving touchdowns and a total of 1,500 yards. He's only 24 years old and could be a number 3 option behind Rice and Kelce. He has struggled with drops at times, though, and with drops being a huge issue for the Chiefs offense last year, that does give me a bit of a pause. Bengals wide receiver Tyler Boyd is out there as well, and he's had 3 straight seasons of at least 667 yards catching passes behind Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. At the right price, I would be interested, and he, like Ridley, is 29 years old, but more of a wide receiver 3 in my opinion. And honestly, I could go on and on with potential targets for KC, because The list is very long, but if they could find a way to snag Calvin Ridley, that sounds great to me and dangerous as hell for the simple reason of having another legitimate receiving weapon with an aging Kelsey and a rising Rice. He may quickly get priced out of the Chiefs' range though, so then you have some cheaper alternatives like Darnell Mooney, with many saying KC would be a perfect landing spot. His familiarity with Matt Nagy makes me think Mooney is a very likely option to end up in KC. And then obviously I mentioned several others aside from him as well. And with all that being said, what are your thoughts on the wide receivers the Chiefs should target in free agency? Are you in on the Calvin Ridley bandwagon, or nah, he will be way too expensive? And if you are out on Ridley, who are you wanting to see the Chiefs target that you believe would be a great fit in KC's offense and maybe wouldn't break the bank? We also can't forget the Chiefs will more than likely draft a receiver as well, but that's a whole conversation for another time. So let me know your thoughts on all this for now in the comments down below. And until next time, let's go. Let's freaking go. How about those?